Daniel Cross stood in the crowded auditorium watching his daughter accept her diploma when his communication device buzzed against his wrist. He glanced down and saw the seal of the Galactic Council glowing on the small screen. His stomach tightened. Messages from the council were rare and usually meant trouble. He waited until the ceremony ended, and his daughter found him in the crowd with her bright smile and certificate held high. He hugged her and promised to take her to dinner before excusing himself to check the message properly. In the quiet hallway outside the auditorium, Daniel opened the full transmission. The message was brief and formal. Ambassador Cross was required to appear before the full Galactic Council in 5 days. No explanation was given, no context provided. Just a summons with the weight of 15 alien civilizations behind it. Daniel had been Earth's representative to the Council for 3 years and had never received anything like this. Emergency sessions were called maybe once a decade and usually involved threats to galactic security like rogue AI or dimensional rifts. He immediately contacted Amy Foster, who served as his aide and expert in alien cultures. She answered within seconds, and her face appeared on his screen looking concerned. Daniel showed her the message and watched her eyes scan the text twice. Amy was brilliant at reading between the lines of diplomatic communications. She had studied 17 alien languages and could interpret body language from species that did not even have bodies similar to humans. After a moment, she looked up at him with worry clear on her face. They agreed to meet at the launch facility in 2 hours. Daniel spent the time with his daughter trying to focus on her achievement, but his mind kept returning to the summons. What could require his immediate presence? Earth had been careful to follow all Council protocols since joining 12 years ago. Humanity was still the newest member of the galactic community, and everyone knew the older species watched their every move with suspicion. At the launch facility, Daniel found Amy already aboard the Horizon's Edge, preparing their ship for departure. The vessel was small by galactic standards, but fast and well-equipped for diplomatic missions. As they cleared Earth's atmosphere and engaged the faster-than-light drive, Amy began pulling up recent Council communications and galactic news reports. She worked in silence for nearly an hour, while Daniel reviewed his notes on current interstellar issues. Finally, Amy turned to him with information that made his blood run cold. Through back channels and unofficial sources, she had learned that the Council had been in closed sessions for the past week. The topic was human expansion in the outer reaches. The Dorathi Empire had filed a formal complaint claiming that human colonies had been established in space that belonged to them. According to what Amy could discover, the Council had already made a decision. The emergency session was not a discussion or negotiation. It was a formal presentation of their ruling. Daniel asked how bad the decision was. Amy pulled up a map showing 17 human colony worlds highlighted in red. These worlds housed over 8 million people. Families who had left Earth to build new lives. Farmers and engineers and teachers who had spent years transforming barren planets into homes. According to the information Amy gathered, the Council was going to order complete evacuation of all 17 worlds within 60 days. The 3-day journey to Zenthar Prime gave Daniel time to study everything Amy could find about the Dorathi claim. The Dorathi were a reptilian species that had dominated galactic politics for centuries. Their empire was vast, and their military was the strongest in known space. They were also known for aggressive expansion and for using Council procedures to legitimize territorial grabs. Ambassador Krell, who represented the Dorathi, was famous for his skill at manipulating Council votes. Amy discovered that the Dorathi claim rested on ancient survey markers found in the disputed region. These markers supposedly proved that the Dorathi had explored and claimed that space thousands of years before humans even left Earth. Under Council law, prior claim took precedence over current occupation. It seemed like an open and shut case. Daniel knew that Earth's government would likely order him to accept the Council's decision. Humanity could not afford to make enemies when they were still so new to the galactic stage. As the horizon's edge approached Zenthar Prime, Daniel stood at the viewport, looking at the massive space station that served as the Council's headquarters. The structure was enormous and ancient. It had been built over 3,000 years ago and had been expanded by each generation since. Towers and domes connected by bridges stretched in all directions. Lights glowed from millions of windows. Ships from every member species docked at ports along the outer ring. This was the center of galactic civilization, and Daniel was about to walk into its heart to hear a judgment against his people. The docking procedures took an hour. Security was always tight at Council facilities, and human ships received extra scrutiny. Daniel and Amy were scanned 3 times before being allowed into the station proper. As they walked through the corridors toward the diplomatic quarter, Daniel noticed the looks from aliens of various species. Some were curious, others seemed dismissive. A few appeared almost pitying. They reached Earth's embassy and found messages waiting from home. President Karen Walsh had sent instructions. Daniel was to listen to the Council's ruling and accept it with grace. Earth could not afford conflict. The colonists would be relocated to other worlds. It would be difficult, but it was necessary to maintain good relations with the galactic community. Daniel read the message twice and felt something hard settle in his chest. That evening, Daniel sat alone in his quarters, reviewing files on the disputed colonies. He looked at images of New Terra, where his old friend Lisa Chen served as governor. He saw pictures of farms and schools. He watched videos of children playing in parks under alien skies. These were not just statistics or political bargaining chips. These were human lives. These were homes that people had built with their own hands. Amy knocked on his door near midnight. She entered and sat down across from him, looking exhausted. She had spent hours reaching out to contacts in other delegations trying to get more information. What she learned was not encouraging. Every other species on the Council had already agreed to support the Dorathi claim. The vote would be unanimous. Humanity would stand alone. Amy asked Daniel what he planned to do. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. He said he did not know yet, but that he was tired of everyone assuming humans would just accept whatever the older species decided. Amy nodded slowly. She told him that whatever he chose, she would support him. Then she left him alone with his thoughts and the weight of 8 million lives resting on whatever he said tomorrow. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was designed to inspire awe, and Daniel had to admit it succeeded. The room was circular and vast, with seating for representatives from all 15 member species arranged in rising tiers. At the center stood a platform where those called to speak would stand under the gaze of the entire assembly. Holographic displays floated throughout the space, showing real-time translations in dozens of languages and whatever visual information was being presented. The ceiling arched high overhead, embedded with lights that mimicked stars. This room had witnessed 3,000 years of galactic history, and Daniel was about to become part of it. He entered with Amy following 2 steps behind as protocol required. The chamber was already full. Daniel recognized ambassadors from each member species, seated in their designated areas. Chancellor Vexithara occupied the highest seat as current council chair. She was Zenthari, and her 4 arms moved in constant small gestures that Daniel had learned indicated careful attention. Her insectoid face was unreadable to human eyes, but her posture suggested formal disapproval. To her left sat Ambassador Krell, looking satisfied in a way that made Daniel's jaw tighten. Daniel took his position on the central platform. Amy moved to the observers' gallery where aides and staff were permitted to watch. The chamber fell silent as Chancellor Vexithara raised one of her arms in the traditional gesture that opened formal sessions. Her voice when she spoke was translated instantly into English through Daniel's earpiece, though he had learned enough Zenthari to follow the original words. She declared the session open and stated its purpose with cold formality. The Council had been presented with evidence of human territorial violations. After careful consideration, a resolution had been reached. Ambassador Cross had been summoned to hear the Council's judgment and acknowledge its wisdom. Ambassador Krell rose from his seat and moved to a secondary platform. The Dorothi was tall and covered in dark green scales that caught the light. His eyes were golden and showed the vertical pupils common to his species. When he spoke, his voice was smooth and confident. He began by thanking the Council for their attention to this serious matter. Then he launched into his presentation with the skill of someone who had done this many times before. Holographic displays materialized showing maps of the disputed region. Krell explained that this area of space had been surveyed by the Dorothi Empire over 2,000 years ago. He showed images of ancient marker beacons that his people had placed to claim the territory. These markers were still functional, and their data cores contained records proving Dorothi ownership. Under the ancient laws that governed the Council, prior claim took absolute precedence. Then Krell shifted his presentation to focus on human expansion. More maps appeared showing how human colonies had spread in the past decade. Krell described this growth as aggressive and destabilizing. He showed military exercises that human defense forces had conducted near the disputed worlds. He referenced Earth's violent history, pointing to the wars that had nearly destroyed humanity before they reached space. His implication was clear. Humans were dangerous, and their refusal to respect established territorial claims proved they could not be trusted. Other council members began adding their voices. A Valasian diplomat named Mira Thane spoke more gently, but still expressed concern about human unpredictability. A representative from the Korthian Collective mentioned that humans had been in space for barely a century, while other species had been navigating the stars for millennia. The message from all of them was the same. Humans needed to learn their place in the galactic order. Daniel listened carefully and took notes on his data pad. He watched Krell's presentation with particular attention, focusing on the survey markers that formed the basis of the Dorothi claim. Something about them bothered him, but he could not quite identify what. In the observer's gallery, Amy was also watching intently. Daniel saw her suddenly lean forward and begin working on her own device with rapid movements. The presentations continued for over an hour. When they finally concluded, Chancellor Vexithara called for the formal vote on the resolution. One by one, each council member signaled their agreement. The vote was unanimous, as everyone had expected. 15 species all agreed that humanity must evacuate the 17 colony worlds within 60 days. Chancellor Vexithara announced the result with formal gravity. She stated that the Council would provide assistance in relocating the affected colonists to other suitable worlds. She emphasized that this decision was made in the interest of galactic peace and stability. Then she turned her attention to Daniel. Her translated words were clear and direct. Ambassador Cross was called upon to acknowledge the Council's wisdom and accept the terms on behalf of humanity. The chamber fell completely silent. Every eye in the room focused on Daniel. This was supposed to be a formality. Human ambassadors were expected to bow to the Council's authority like everyone else. President Walsh had sent clear instructions to accept whatever ruling was given. Daniel could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on him. He was supposed to lower his head and agree and walk away while 8 million humans lost their homes. Daniel's datapad buzzed softly. He glanced down and saw a message from Amy. It was brief, but it changed everything. The survey markers that Krell had referenced were not Dorothi. Amy had run an analysis of the symbols and design. They matched the technology of the Vrel civilization. The Vrel had been extinct for over 2,000 years, wiped out when the Dorothi Empire conquered their space and took their worlds. The markers Krell was using to prove Dorothi claim were actually stolen Vrel property. Daniel looked up from his datapad. He saw Krell watching him with barely concealed contempt. He saw Chancellor Vexithara waiting with impatience. He saw the other council members already beginning to relax, thinking the matter settled. In the gallery, Amy met his eyes and gave the smallest nod. She had verified her findings. She was certain. Daniel slowly stood straighter. He took a breath and considered his next words carefully. He thought about Lisa Chen and the other colonists. He thought about his daughter graduating back on Earth and the future she would inherit. He thought about what it meant to be human, and whether that meant always accepting what others decided for you. Then he opened his mouth and spoke two words that had never been uttered in this chamber in 3,000 years of galactic history. He said them clearly and without hesitation. His voice carried through the translation systems to every species present. The words were simple and absolute. Daniel Cross looked directly at Chancellor Vexithera and said, "We decline." The chamber erupted in shocked voices and confused movements. Chancellor Vexithara's forearms froze in mid-gesture. Ambassador Krell's golden eyes widened in disbelief. In the gallery, Amy closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The universe had just shifted, and nobody was quite sure what would happen next. Daniel stood alone on the platform and waited for the chaos to settle so he could explain exactly why humanity was refusing to obey. The confusion in the Grand Chamber lasted for almost a full minute. Ambassadors from 15 species talked over each other in a dozen different languages, creating a wall of sound that the translation systems struggled to process. Chancellor Vexithara raised all 4 of her arms in a gesture demanding silence, but it took 3 attempts before the noise died down enough for her to speak. Her translated voice came through sharp with disbelief. She asked Daniel to repeat himself because surely she had misunderstood. Surely the human ambassador was not refusing a unanimous council decision. Daniel stood perfectly still on the platform. His heart was pounding, but his voice remained steady when he spoke. He repeated his statement with the same calm clarity. Humanity declined the council's resolution. They would not evacuate the 17 colony worlds. They would not surrender territory that belonged to them based on a claim that could not withstand scrutiny. The words fell into the chamber like stones into still water, and the ripples spread quickly. Ambassador Krell was the first to respond. The Dorathi rose from his seat with his scales reflecting the harsh light. His voice was filled with contempt when he demanded to know how a species barely a century in space dared to question the judgment of the Galactic Council. He called Daniel's statement an insult to 3,000 years of diplomatic tradition. Other voices joined his. A Korthian representative called for Daniel to be removed from the chamber for contempt. A Hydrian ambassador suggested that humanity's council membership should be suspended immediately. Chancellor Vexithara gestured for silence again, and this time achieved it more quickly. She turned her attention fully to Daniel, and her body language showed something between anger and confusion. She stated that the council had spoken. The matter was decided. Human opinion was noted but irrelevant. The resolution would be enforced. She asked Daniel one final time to acknowledge the council's authority and accept the judgment or face severe consequences. Daniel waited until he was certain he had everyone's attention. Then he began to speak in a measured tone that carried through the translation systems clearly. He thanked the council for their time and acknowledged their long experience in galactic affairs. He said that humanity had great respect for the institution of the council and the ideals it was founded upon. Then he systematically began to dismantle everything Ambassador Krell had presented. Daniel called up his own holographic displays, showing detailed analysis of the survey markers that formed the basis of the Dorathi claim. He pointed out the specific design elements and technological signatures that Amy had identified. These markers were not Dorathi technology. They belonged to the Vrel civilization, the Vrel who had been conquered and destroyed by the Dorathi Empire 2,000 years ago, the Vrel whose territory the Dorathi had seized through military force. The markers proved that this space had been claimed, but not by the Dorothi. Krell immediately objected. He argued that the Dorothi had legitimate claim to all former Vrel territory through right of conquest. Daniel countered by asking if the Council recognized conquest as a valid basis for territorial claims. Because if it did, then the entire framework of galactic law meant nothing. The Council was supposedly founded on principles of peaceful cooperation and respect for sovereignty. If conquest was acceptable, then any species with sufficient military power could simply take whatever they wanted and call it legitimate. The chamber grew quieter as Daniel continued. He showed maps demonstrating that human colonies had been established in space that contained no markers of any kind. The colonists had followed Council protocols. They had surveyed the area. They had found no evidence of prior claims. They had filed proper documentation. Everything had been done according to the rules that the Council itself had established. The only claim against them was based on Dorothi conquest of an extinct species, and that was not a legitimate claim under the Council's own laws. But Daniel did not stop there. He shifted his focus to the process itself. He pointed out that this emergency session was not a negotiation or even an arbitration. The Council had made its decision before hearing from Earth. The vote had been predetermined. This entire session was theater designed to force humanity into submission. The message was clear. Humans were new and weak, so they must accept whatever the older and stronger species decided, regardless of facts or law. Daniel's voice grew stronger as he continued. He stated that this was not justice. This was the corruption of an institution that had forgotten its own founding principles. The Council had become a tool for the powerful to dominate the weak. It had become exactly what it was created to prevent, and humanity would not participate in that corruption no matter the cost. Ambassador Krell demanded that Daniel be silenced. Chancellor Vexithera threatened immediate expulsion from the Council and sanctions against Earth. Other ambassadors joined in with their own threats and condemnations. But Daniel stood his ground on the platform and raised his voice to be heard above the chaos. He stated clearly that humanity valued the Council's ideals. They wanted to be part of a galactic community based on law and mutual respect, but they would not submit to a system that had abandoned those principles. If the Council chose to expel humanity, then Earth would leave with dignity. If sanctions were imposed, then humanity would endure them. But they would not abandon 8 million people to satisfy a fraudulent claim designed to teach them their place. The chamber descended into chaos again. Ambassadors shouted. Translation systems struggled. Security personnel moved closer to the central platform, unsure if they were about to witness a physical confrontation. In the observers' gallery, Amy watched with a mixture of pride and terror. She knew what this meant. Daniel had just declared that humanity would rather face the entire galaxy alone than bow to injustice. It was noble and terrifying in equal measure. Chancellor Vexithera finally restored order by activating an override that temporarily disabled all communication devices, except her own. Her voice filled the chamber, demanding attention. She stated that humanity's rejection was noted. The consequences would be severe. The Council would meet in closed session to determine appropriate responses. Ambassador Cross was dismissed and would be confined to Earth's embassy pending further decisions. His diplomatic status was suspended effective immediately. Daniel nodded once in acknowledgement. He gathered his datapad and turned to leave the platform. As he walked toward the exit, he passed close to Ambassador Krell. The Dorothi leaned slightly toward him and spoke in English so the translators would not pick it up. He told Daniel that his pride had just doomed his species. The Dorothi fleet would ensure that human colonies were evacuated one way or another. Daniel met Krell's golden eyes and replied just as quietly. He said that the Dorothi were welcome to try, but they should remember that humans had not survived centuries of war on Earth by backing down when threatened. Daniel left the grand chamber with Amy falling into step beside him. Behind them, the Council erupted into heated debate. Some species called for immediate military action. Others urged caution. A few voices quietly suggested that maybe the human had made valid points that deserved consideration. But those voices were drowned out by the majority who saw Daniel's rejection as an unacceptable challenge to the established order. As Daniel and Amy walked through the corridors back to Earth's embassy, they passed aliens of various species who stared at them with expressions ranging from shock to anger to something that might have been respect. Word of what had happened was already spreading through the station. By the time they reached the embassy, the story was being broadcast on news networks across the galaxy. The human diplomat who had shocked the council by refusing their decree. Some called him a hero, others called him a fool. But everyone agreed that the galaxy had just changed in ways nobody could fully predict yet. On Earth, President Karen Walsh stood in the Situation Room surrounded by advisors and military leaders, watching the replay of Daniel's speech for the third time. The room was divided sharply between those who thought Daniel had committed career suicide and those who believed he had done exactly what needed to be done. Karen rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. She had sent Daniel clear instructions to accept the council's ruling, and he had ignored them completely. Now she had to decide whether to support his position or disavow him publicly. General Nathan Cole stood near the main display showing tactical maps of the disputed colonies. The military commander was reviewing fleet positions and running scenarios. If the Dorathi decided to enforce the evacuation by force, Earth's defenses would be tested severely. The Dorathi Empire had ships and weapons that had been refined over centuries of warfare. Humanity's space navy was barely 20 years old. But Cole had not spent 2 decades preparing for nothing. He had contingencies and some surprises that the galaxy did not know about yet. In the Dorathi Military Command Center, Admiral Zathran watched the same footage of Daniel's rejection with cold calculation. The human's defiance was an insult that demanded response. But more than that, it was an opportunity. The Dorathi Empire had been looking for ways to demonstrate their continued dominance. Other species had been growing restless lately, questioning Dorathi influence. A swift military action against the upstart humans would remind everyone why the Dorathi ruled their corner of the galaxy. Zathran began issuing orders to mobilize the fleet. Meanwhile, on New Terra, Governor Lisa Chen stood before a crowd of worried colonists in the main settlement square. News of the council's decree and Daniel's rejection had reached them hours ago. People wanted answers. They wanted to know if they would have to abandon the homes they had spent years building. Lisa looked at the faces in the crowd. She saw farmers who had coaxed earth crops to grow in alien soil. She saw engineers who had built power systems and water recycling plants. She saw teachers and doctors and families who had made this world their own. She told them the truth. Earth stood with them. Ambassador Cross had rejected the council's order. Now they had to be ready for whatever came next. Back on Zenthar Prime, Daniel sat in his confined quarters at Earth's embassy, monitoring news feeds from across the galaxy. The reaction was more mixed than he had expected. Many species condemned his rejection as the arrogance of a young civilization that did not understand galactic realities, but others were starting to question the process. Independent journalists were digging into the Dorathi claim and finding the same evidence Amy had discovered. The survey markers were Vrel not Dorathi. The claim was indeed fraudulent. Even some species that had voted for the resolution were beginning to express private doubts about how the matter had been handled. Amy entered his quarters carrying more information she had gathered. She reported that a faction within the council was forming. Counselor Mira Thane was quietly reaching out to other moderate voices, species who had felt pressured by Dorathi influence, nations that had their own grievances with how the council operated. Mira had sent a secret message suggesting that if humanity held firm, there might be a path forward. But it would require patience and careful diplomacy. The hardliners led by Krell were pushing for immediate action, but they did not speak for everyone. On the colonies themselves, the settlers were organizing. Governor Lisa Chen coordinated with the other 16 colony worlds to present a unified front. They decided to broadcast directly to the galactic media, show the galaxy what was really at stake. The first broadcast came from a farming settlement on New Terra. A man named Jake Morrison stood in front of his fields with his wife and 2 children. He spoke simply about coming to this world 5 years ago, about breaking ground and planting the first seeds, about watching his children grow up under these skies. He said they were not soldiers or politicians. They were just people trying to build a better life, and they were not leaving. The broadcast went viral across galactic networks. More colonists added their voices. A teacher showing her classroom, a doctor in a small clinic, engineers working on a water purification system. The colonists were not presenting themselves as warriors or making threats. They were simply showing their humanity, making it clear that this was not about abstract territory or diplomatic points. These were real lives and real homes. The emotional impact was significant. Public opinion in several species began to shift. The Dorathi response was to accelerate their military mobilization. Admiral Zathron assembled a fleet of 30 warships and began moving toward the disputed zone. The message was clear. The humans could make emotional appeals all they wanted. The Dorathi had the power to enforce the Council's decree regardless of public sentiment. When the Dorathi fleet entered the border region near human space, tensions skyrocketed throughout the galaxy. General Nathan Cole had been watching the Dorathi movements carefully. When their fleet crossed into the disputed zone, he gave the order for human ships to deploy. 12 Earth defense vessels moved into position around the colonies. They were outnumbered badly, but Cole was not planning to attack. This was a defensive posture. If the Dorathi wanted to seize these worlds, they would have to go through human ships first, and Cole had made sure those ships were ready for exactly this scenario. The galaxy held its breath as the 2 fleets faced each other. The Dorathi had overwhelming force, but attacking would mean open warfare with humanity. Admiral Zathron sent a message demanding that human ships withdraw and the colonists prepare for evacuation. General Cole responded that human forces were defending legitimate territory and would not move. The standoff began. Then something unexpected happened. 3 ships from other species arrived in the disputed zone. They were not warships. They were observer vessels from species that wanted to witness whatever occurred. Counselor Mira Thane had arranged for them to be present. Their purpose was not to fight, but to ensure that if the Dorathi attacked human colonies, the entire galaxy would see exactly what happened. The presence of these witnesses complicated Zathron's calculations significantly. President Karen Walsh made her decision after consulting with her advisors for hours. She appeared on Earth's global broadcast networks to address the situation. She stated that after reviewing all evidence, she supported Ambassador Cross's position. The Council's decree was based on a fraudulent claim, and Earth would not abandon its citizens. She called for the Council to reopen the matter under a fair process, but she also made clear that humanity hoped for a peaceful resolution. Earth did not want war, but they would defend their people if necessary. The political pressure was building from multiple directions. Counselor Mira Thane and her coalition were arguing within the Council for a new approach. Public opinion was turning as more details about the Dorathi claim became known. The observer ships made military action risky from a diplomatic standpoint. Admiral Zathron reported to his government that while he could certainly defeat the human fleet, the cost in galactic opinion might be too high. Chancellor Vexithara found herself in an impossible position. The Council's authority had been challenged, and she needed to respond, but using force would potentially tear the Council apart. Daniel received a secret communication from Counselor Mira Thane. She came to the embassy personally late at night, entering through a private entrance. In a quiet meeting room, she told Daniel that there was a chance to resolve this without bloodshed. but it would require compromise from both sides. Not the surrender that had been demanded, but genuine negotiation. She warned that the hardliners were still pushing for military action. Time was running short. Daniel needed to propose something that would give everyone a way out of this crisis. Daniel spent the rest of the night working with Amy on a proposal. It was radical and would require courage from both humans and aliens. But it offered a path forward that served the Council's stated ideals while protecting humanity's legitimate interests. When morning came, Daniel sent the proposal to Chancellor Vexithara with copies to key council members. Then he waited to see if anyone would have the courage to choose a new direction. In space above the colonies, both fleets remained on alert. Weapons were charged, shields were active. Millions of people across the galaxy watched and wondered if they were about to witness the first major war in galactic space in over 1,000 years. The next move belonged to the Council, and whatever they chose would echo through galactic history for generations to come. Daniel's proposal arrived on Chancellor Vexithara's desk at dawn on Zenthar Prime. She read it 3 times before calling an emergency meeting of senior council members. The human ambassador was suggesting something that had never been done in 3,000 years of council history. He wanted to create a formal appeals process where any species could challenge council decisions. He proposed that a neutral panel of judges from non-involved species would review disputed claims using verified evidence. No more closed-door sessions. No more predetermined votes. Real transparency and accountability built into the council's structure. The proposal was clever because it did not just address the current crisis. It offered a framework that would benefit smaller species who had long felt powerless against the influence of empires like the Dorathi. Daniel included humanity's willingness to accept the judgment of such a neutral panel regarding the colonies. But he made clear that acceptance depended on the process being genuinely fair and not just another way for powerful species to impose their will. The proposal ended with a direct challenge. The Council could evolve and strengthen itself, or it could continue as it was and watch its legitimacy slowly crumble. Chancellor Vexithara was a traditionalist who had served the Council for 60 years. She believed in the institution deeply. But she was not blind to its flaws. She had watched powerful species manipulate procedures. She had seen legitimate grievances ignored because the complainant lacked influence. She had rationalized these problems as necessary compromises to maintain galactic stability. Daniel's proposal forced her to confront whether stability built on injustice was really stability at all. The emergency meeting included representatives from each major faction on the Council. Ambassador Krell attended representing the hardliners. He dismissed Daniel's proposal as an obvious ploy to escape consequences. He argued that the Council's authority could not be questioned, or the entire system would collapse. Other voices agreed with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but Councillor Mira Thane spoke for the reformists. She pointed out that the system was already fracturing. Public opinion was turning against the Council. Several species had privately expressed support for examining the Dorathi claim more carefully. The choice was not between change and stability, but between controlled evolution and chaotic collapse. In space above the disputed colonies, the standoff continued. Admiral Zathran grew increasingly frustrated waiting for orders. His ships were ready. The human vessels were hopelessly outnumbered. One command and this situation could be resolved through superior firepower, but his government was hesitating. The presence of observer ships meant that any attack would be witnessed and recorded. The shifting public opinion across the galaxy made military action politically complicated. Zathran was a warrior, but he understood politics enough to know that sometimes force created more problems than it solved. General Nathan Cole maintained his defensive positions carefully. His ships were deployed to protect the colonies without appearing aggressive. He had moved his most advanced vessels into the region. The Dorathi did not know that Earth's engineers had made significant breakthroughs in shield technology and weapons systems. If fighting started, the humans would lose eventually, but they would make the Dorathi pay a higher price than anyone expected. Cole hoped it would not come to that, but he was prepared either way. On New Terra, Governor Lisa Chen organized the colonists to continue their lives as normally as possible under the circumstances. Children still went to school. Farmers still worked their fields. The message was clear. These people were not abandoning their homes based on threats. If they had to leave, it would be because a fair process determined they must and not before. Jake Morrison, who had become something of a spokesperson, gave another interview to Galactic Media. He spoke about what it meant to call a place home, how it was not just buildings and land, but the life you built there. He said that humans had come to the stars to grow and explore. They would not be pushed out by fraudulent claims and intimidation. Chancellor Vexithara spent 2 days consulting with council members privately. She spoke with dozens of ambassadors. She listened to concerns and arguments from all sides. Slowly, she came to realize that Daniel's proposal had support from more species than anyone had openly admitted. Many council members were tired of Dorathi dominance. Others had their own territorial disputes that a fair appeals process might help resolve. The old guard resisted, but they were not as unified as they appeared. A vote was called on whether to implement Daniel's proposed reforms. The session was public and broadcast across the galaxy. Chancellor Vexithara opened by acknowledging that the council faced a critical moment. She stated that institutions must evolve to remain relevant. Then she did something that shocked everyone, including herself. She spoke in favor of the reforms. She argued that the council's legitimacy came from its commitment to justice and peaceful resolution. If those principles were honored only in theory but not in practice, then the institution had failed its purpose. Better to change and strengthen than to maintain a hollow authority. The reaction was explosive. Ambassador Krell accused Vexithara of betraying everything the council stood for. Other hardliners joined his protests. But Councillor Mira Thane rose to support the Chancellor. She was followed by representatives from 6 other species. One by one, they argued that reform was necessary, that the current system concentrated too much power in too few hands, that newer species deserved genuine voices, not just symbolic seats. The debate stretched for hours. When the vote finally came, it was closer than anyone expected, but the reforms passed by a narrow margin. The council would establish a formal appeals process. An independent investigative body would be created to verify territorial claims. Decisions could be challenged and reviewed under transparent procedures. The old system had not been destroyed, but it had been fundamentally changed. Power was more distributed. Accountability was built in. The galaxy had shifted. Immediately, the new process was applied to the dispute over human colonies. A panel of judges from 3 species uninvolved in the matter was appointed. They were given full authority to review all evidence and make a binding decision. The investigation took only 2 weeks. When the panel announced their findings, they were unambiguous. The Dorathi claim was based on conquest of extinct Vrel territory and had no validity under galactic law. The human colonies were established legally in unclaimed space. The Council's original decree was nullified. Humanity retained full rights to the 17 worlds. Admiral Zathron received orders to withdraw his fleet. He did so with barely concealed anger, but he obeyed. The Dorathi Empire had been humiliated politically, though not militarily. Ambassador Krell was recalled to his homeworld, where his superiors were unhappy with how badly the situation had been mishandled. His career in galactic diplomacy was effectively over. The Dorathi would remain powerful, but their ability to manipulate council procedures had been severely reduced. On New Terra, the celebrations were joyful and genuine. Governor Lisa Chen stood before crowds of colonists and announced that their homes were secure. Jake Morrison hugged his wife and children under alien skies, knowing they would not be torn away. Similar scenes played out on all 17 worlds. 8 million people could continue building their lives. The relief was overwhelming. Daniel Cross was released from confinement, and his diplomatic status was restored. President Karen Walsh contacted him personally to express Earth's gratitude and admit that his judgment had been correct. When Daniel finally returned to New Terra to visit Lisa Chen, he walked through settlements that flew both Earth flags and local colony banners. People recognized him and thanked him. He tried to explain that many others had contributed, but they insisted on treating him as a hero. Standing in a field on New Terra with Lisa Chen beside him, Daniel reflected on what had happened. He had not planned to spark a galactic reform movement. He had simply refused to accept injustice when everyone expected submission. The fact that his refusal had led to systemic change was almost accidental. But perhaps that was how important changes always happened. Someone had to be willing to say no even when it seemed impossible. Lisa asked what he thought would happen next. Daniel watched Jake Morrison teaching his son to operate farming equipment in the distance. He saw other colonists working on expanding their settlement. He considered the question carefully before answering. The council would never be perfect. There would be new challenges and new conflicts. But at least now there were mechanisms for addressing them fairly. Newer species had genuine voices. The powerful could be held accountable. It was not perfection, but it was progress. Back on Zenthar Prime, Chancellor Vex Thara presided over the first session of the Reformed Council. The procedures were different, more transparent. There was resistance from those who missed the old certainties, but there was also energy from species who finally felt heard. Councillor Mira Thane smiled slightly, watching a representative from a young civilization present a proposal without being dismissed out of hand. The council was not what it had been. Maybe that was exactly what it needed. In the following months, other species began using the new appeals process. Territorial disputes that had festered for decades were finally reviewed fairly. Some older decisions were overturned. A few powerful species found themselves having to justify claims they had taken for granted. The galaxy was adjusting to a new reality where might did not automatically equal right, and where even the newest voices could challenge the oldest powers. Humanity had not just defended their colonies. They had helped transform the entire system, and they had done it not through superior weapons or ancient wisdom, but through the simple courage to stand up and say that justice mattered more than convenience. The galaxy would remember that lesson for a very long time.